There's one episode of America's history that is told very differently depending on who you are and where you live. It is the story of our Civil War and what came after.
We have not adequately understood who we are as a nation.
There's a big movement to remove Confederate history. I don't see the pain in the symbol.
I don't think that slavery and Jim Crow should be forgotten.
I'm gonna disagree with a common idea that the Civil War was totally about slavery.
You don't really hear the word slavery or slaves in Mississippi. The simple term is whitewash.
In that reconciliation, the nation itself embraces the Confederacy.
All of this tension and anger comes from the erasure of African Americans' history.
We all should learn the real history because we think we know, but we don't.
No.
Oh, okay.
Gardens.
Where?
Carroll Gardens.
Oh, Carroll Gardens, yeah. I lived in Carroll Gardens between 87 and 93.
Oh, got it. Okay. Where it was, I first moved to New York in 96 for graduate school.
Uh-huh.
And I went to the journalism school at Columbia. And
that's the one in Manhattan? I'm kidding.
Yeah. And they assign you beats. Like everybody gets a neighborhood.
Oh, a beat. That makes total sense. Right. So,
and I a lot of us were totally basically fresh off the boat. We didn't know anything. We didn't know where we were. We knew nothing about the city. And they give you some random neighborhood somewhere in the 5 boroughs. And my beat was Carroll Gardens. So Carroll Gardens, Forum, it's up to Atlantic Avenue.
Yeah.
Swath.
Well, right. Well, this could be an interesting conversation, and we can pivot to the film because when I lived there in that particular neighborhood, it was still very much an Italian neighborhood with the beginnings of gentrification. For instance, my being there probably, but and I lived right on Smith Street, which was not the greatest location because the F train and G train ran under my building, all the time. But there were a couple of instances very early on where some of the, African-American kids down from, the next neighborhood over came over, and there were still like incidents where they got beaten up because they'd come into the wrong neighborhood where there was still this legacy of like divide,
I think it was a Moth podcast about that. This neighborhood. It was a Black journalist or writer who told a story about being a kid in this neighborhood or going to school.
Interesting. Yeah. I was really it's an eye-opener for me.
Yeah.
As a young kid, like kind of my first New York apartment, and then by the time you moved there, it was under a great transition because, all of the Smith Street was going through this renaissance, and I had been living in Manhattan for years by then. And by the time I came back to Brooklyn, it was a whole other. Brooklyn then became Brooklyn, it was, Anyway, it's nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too.
And I don't know how hasn't been I don't know how it is that we haven't met before. It seems.
Well, my films take forever. I work on one film for forever. So
how long did this one take?
I started thinking about this film in July of 2015. I started shooting this film in January of 2016. And I finished the film in 2020, and it came out in 2021.
Wow. I was reading all the press materials and everything, and I liked how it was like we started the film, this documentary, toward the end of the Obama years, and we finished it. It's like kind of totally omitting the guy in between in the language of the film, which is fine. We can just leave that name out there. I don't care,
Well, I left him out of the movie. I mean, I didn't put him in the movie.
Yeah. Well, in a way, I feel like, I mean, this just occurs to me as we're talking about it, but in a way it's this, he's sort of beside the point yes, he sort of opened the door to, one could say, to being free to behave and divulge your behavior, what have you, your feelings now, and not feel ashamed about it or apologize for it. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't there already. Oh, yeah. And the film really focuses on the institutional aspects of it.
Yeah, or just sort of more deep rooted.
Right.
The parts of it that are deeply integrated into how we tell the story of who we are, which was there long before Trump. And Trump was able to use that to his ends. But it didn't come from Trump. And he's not, right. He's sort of a symptom of something much bigger.
Right. So, and I think it's where the hard people, white people, when I say people, have kind of the hardest time with this, apologizing, for lack of another word, the institutional, or not what I'm trying to say is or just connecting the dots about what institutional, racism is, like that it's so entrenched in the laws and our institutions, and that it's just not like, well, I have no control over that, so I can't really, doesn't make any sense to me or something.
You mean you feel like white people, say that again, I don't know.
They don't seem to get, well, I don't mean everybody, of course, but a lot of people just don't seem to get this idea of institutional racism. They just don't understand, like that it's.
Because white people don't have to think about race. I mean,
there's that.
I mean, white people in their whole life, when I was young, when I went to college, I never considered taking an African-American history class, which was, by the way, in the African-American Studies department, right? That was the name of the department.
Right, right.
Because I thought that doesn't have anything to do with me. Why would I take a class in that department? That's not my story. And I think a lot of white people feel that way, that the story of race in America is not their story, which is of course completely absurd, because race, I mean, this is getting overly intellectual, but race is entirely made up. It's not real. And the entire story of race is.
Explain what that means, because you're saying race is a construct, right? So that's the seed of what we're talking about, that you go back to that.
Right.
It all starts with that.
I mean, I'm Jewish. And when my mother was young, there was a quota in her school for how many Jews were supposed to be allowed, right? There was a time in this country where Jews were not considered white. But today, when I walk down the street, people look at me and I'm white, right? I walk through the world as a white person today. That's because Jews here became white. Just like Italians, we were talking about Italians in Carroll Gardens. They have become white. They weren't always considered white. But who we call white has expanded over time.
I would argue that even there are people of color who may not consider Jews white, but in a positive way, or not necessarily positive, but just like like we can relate to each other way.
Well, there's a difference between how people define themselves or see themselves and how the world sees them, right? And so, a Jewish person might not consider themselves white, but the world might see them as white. So
I'm saying maybe another minority might see Jews in a positive sense as not white. In other words, as somebody who's similar to them.
Right.
I mean, I've had that experience in my marriage, which I'm, that particular experience where this was news to me because I just identified as white, but I didn't know I wasn't white, or somebody else may not consider me white. Like I couldn't quite understand that. That was new to me too, So say again.
You're Jewish?
I am Jewish.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be important to tell, and within the context of what I just described. But this is all around this construct issue that we're talking about. That race is you were saying race is a construct, which seems to me the beginning of the whole
but that doesn't mean that it's not real, right?
Mhm.
I mean, it has a real impact on how I walk around and the opportunities that are given to me or my children.
Mhm.
And it has a real impact on people who are, you know, walking to a store or a school or a workplace and are immediately labeled as Black, right? That's the Black person walking in the room. It's a question of how we see each other as American citizens, how we see each other and how we label each other out of the gate.
Describe you worked with Erica Dilday, who I know.
Oh, great.
From the Maisels years.
Yeah.
I don't know if she's still there. She's still there.
No, she's now the head of POV.
She went over to POV. Okay, yes. And so did you feel it was essential to collaborate with an African American filmmaker as well?
Definitely. I mean, I think it was very important as a white person, and just as myself. It was important in making a film. This is a film about how Americans tell the story of the Civil War,
right,
and how they teach it to their children. And I spent many years traveling around the country, going into classrooms and going into people's living rooms and going into public spaces and recording how Americans tell this story, right? And it's a story that really changes depending on where you're standing. And because it is also very much a story of race and Black and white race relations in America, it was very important for me as a white filmmaker to collaborate with Black filmmakers who could help point out the things that I wasn't seeing. And that happened all the time with Erica. Like, I would show her a cut and she would give me a list of 5 things that had never occurred to me that were spot on, totally important. And once she said them, I was like, oh, wow, okay, I need to take that into account. And they were coming from her point of view. They were not things that I would have seen without her.
Right. No, I get that. And it goes back to this example you brought up earlier, which was way before maybe you were still like self-identifying as a journalist. Perhaps you still do, but that you in college wouldn't occur to you to take these African American studies classes because, you know, it's just, you wouldn't know. You would, that it's like, that's over here. You know, and so making the film, this had to be kind of both humbling and also like gratifying for, on a personal level, to an opportunity to really learn and grow.
It was a huge opportunity to learn and grow. I grew enormously making this film. I mean, how long has it? I've been making it for what, 6 years? My library has exploded. I've read books that I should have read when I was 12 that I never did. You know, my knowledge about the history of our country has really deepened. And also, you know, I've come to look at my own life and the life of my family in a very different way. And you know, while I was making this film, as I mentioned to you, we live in Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn, and both my husband and I have 2 girls. And they were both going to the local public school, which is not predominantly, it's almost entirely white, which is a function of the neighborhood in which we live.
Right. Again,
entirely white. And very early on, while I was making this film, that started to feel very uncomfortable to me, that I was sending my children to this school. And the younger one was in a French program, which I personally think is very valuable in terms of diversifying the mind and think in different ways. Language is a big deal. So we kept her there, but the one who was in the general education program, we pulled her out of the school and we put her in a different school that was infinitely more diverse. And frankly, I think way better for her mind and her life. And I never would have done that if I hadn't have been thinking about these issues in the way I was, or, I mean, the way in which I live. I think about the world in a very different way.
You're making informed choices. You're thoughtful. You can't put the genie back in the bottle, which is, I think,
you start thinking about race in this country, once you start recognizing, especially for white people, that the story of race is a story about you.
Right.
You see it everywhere. It's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Okay?
It's intrinsic. Right.
And you have to, I mean, if you want to live by principles that promote equality in our country, we all need to kind of change the way we live and think about, as there's a wonderful scholar in the film, Kelly Carter Jackson, who I think is fantastic. She's a Black woman. She wrote a book called Force and Freedom, which I highly recommend.
Is it in your library by any chance?
It's not on this floor, though. It's in a different books. But yes, and it's a wonderful book, and it's about the use of force by Black people to promote their freedom fighting slavery. And she says one thing in the film that I really took to heart, which is that, white people need to think about the spaces that they're moving through. Is your church all white? Is the school your kids are going to all white? If you send your child to that integrated school, are you putting your money into the school in a way so that it benefits every student? Are you actually putting your resources toward trying to create more benefit for your neighbors and the people who might not have the advantages that you do?
I'm trying to, I have all these thoughts and, my own sort of answers to some of these large philosophical questions, but I'm trying to stay within the context of the documentary.
Sure.
Because it's very easy, as somebody who's thought a lot about this as well, to start really, going down a certain rabbit hole, I suppose, because I just really do have a lot of thoughts about what we're talking about. But that's good. The film will do that to you. I think people should see it because I think it will provoke thoughts and questions and challenge people.
Film that gets people talking to each other,
It's
which I think is valuable. Like, people come out of this film arguing, and sometimes they're made very uncomfortable, and sometimes they really like it, but they definitely talk to each other afterwards.
Well, yeah, being uncomfortable is sort of the first necessary phase to go through.
Yeah.
When you're going to change your perspective.
Yeah.
Because you're changing your perspective is also an internal thing as well. It's not just how you view the world, but it's how you view yourself in that world, So I agree. And the documentary, again, which is called Civil War, or Who Do We Think We Are? And it's out on September 17th. We can mention you've got some wonderful executive producers here in Henry Louis Skip Gates. And can you call him Skip, by the way? Do you have that kind of now relationship with him?
I mean, I call him Professor Gates.
Okay, that's a good answer. My friend and podcast friend, Sam Pollard, he's been on here at least 6 times. With every film. I make sure he comes on and talks about every film.
Yeah.
And somebody named
And a fantastic
Brad, I don't know. Anyway, that's a good one too. Well, it's, you're made a very timely film. It seems like everybody is, in the throes of this conversation around the critical race theory. So it's been so politicized in yet another level. But this is a sequel to your film, I think, what we're going through now, because we're going through a very, very, very difficult phase. But I think, again, it's that discomfort level, perhaps, if you look at it with the half glass full. I think what we're going through now is could be a necessary step to get to the next place we need to get as a country. The removal of, the Civil War, statues, or is sort of just a place where we have to do it, to get to the next spot.
When I was making this film, this conversation wasn't happening in the way it's happening now.
No, because we were post-racial, Rachel. We had elected a Black president. So why do we can pat ourselves on the back now?
Yeah, and so it's great. It's been over the course of the making of this film that this conversation has really exploded, and I think that's fantastic, and I'm hopeful that the film can be part of it. But I also think that the film is valuable because it kind of provides a window into the way other people in our country see, right? Because I did go to so many different places.
Right.
I was in Mississippi, and I was in Tennessee, and I was in Boston and Washington, and I went to classrooms in all of these places. And so you get to see how kids are learning, and you get to see how people who care very deeply about the subject matter feel about the subject matter. And I think it's kind of, because we are such a divided country right now, there aren't really a lot of opportunities to listen to each other in a real way. And I think this film can be an opportunity to hear voices, because it is listening to so many different kinds of people who, by the way, you might not want to listen to.
Right.
But it gives these people space to talk so that we, as a country, right, we as a country can think about all the various points of view that are included in America and how we're going to try and move forward as a nation.
Well said. I'm going to encourage people to see it. It'll be in select theaters on the 17th. And then what's the roadmap here? Does it go on?
It's Peacock picked it up.
Oh, right. I did read that. I forgot. I should have made a mention. Right. Peacock. That's fantastic. Which
it's very exciting. So
means people can see it for free, actually, right? Because it's just get the app.
People to see for free, and hopefully people will watch it, and hopefully people will come out and see it in the theater. We are doing these screenings in various locations, and I'm going to all of them. So, and we're going to be doing panel discussions focusing on how the Civil War and race and racism are taught in American classrooms, to do sort of public conversations around this issue. So my hope is that especially teachers and people who care about education will come to these screenings and really engage with that particular aspect of the film.
Yeah, right. And we need and hopefully take away from the film, we need to listen to each other, because it hasn't been being encouraged the last number of years to, we've been set against each other very, very effectively. And so now we kind of have to pivot.
Well, I think, it's interesting. The last time I released a film was in like 2014, 2013. It was a long time ago. And going through this process today versus going through this process then has been very interesting, because the world has really changed in those years. And one of the big changes has to do with social media and the way in which information is conveyed now in such a large proportion through social media. And I think, that concerns me at some level, because it allows, as everyone has talked about, for the siloing of information. But it's really true. Like, we can all just kind of stay in our own little tribes.
Absolutely right. And then there's alternate facts and alternate truths and realities as a result of that, which is so real truth becomes foggier and foggier.
Yeah. So it's, one of the values of this film in a certain way is kind of old fashioned, right? It's made in sort of an old fashioned way. We went around and we listened to people, and we sat around and we filmed them while they did stuff. And we didn't make things happen in front of the camera. We let things happen in front of the camera. And that took a lot of time, but the result is a film that does really allow people to speak, and that gives space to these various points of view. And it also gives space to the people who see the movie to take it for what they want, like to take in what it's giving them, and to think about their own lives and how their lives fit into what the movie's showing.
Thank you very much. And this has been a pleasure meeting you and talking to you.
Pleasure to meet you too.
Yeah, I wish you much success with this catalyst of a film you've made.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you highlighting it. It means a lot.
Sorry?
I said I appreciate you highlighting it. It means a lot.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. Thanks. I'm glad for the opportunity. So we'll do it again.
All right, terrific. Well, thank you.
And I guess you have another interview right after this?
Oh, not right in like an hour.
Oh, that's good.
So I can.
I know. I'm going to be talking to my friend who runs the Woodstock Film Festival in a little bit.
Is that still Myra?
Yeah, Myra Blaustein. Yes, she's still. Yeah.
She's terrific.
Yeah. I live pretty close to Woodstock, so it's now become my local festival, which is nice because I was going for years before that.
Yeah. When is it?
It's at the end of the month.
Yeah.
So it's on the 29th. So it runs into the first week or well, it's only a few days. So it just bleeds right into the beginning of October, I guess.
It's a lovely, I went to that festival with my first film. And it
Yeah.
was,
What was that one?
Our Brand is Crisis.
Oh yeah, right. I did see that. We didn't mention this as like kind of like loosely a trilogy, but it's okay. I think it's in the.
Okay, people don't need to know that.
Yeah, it's not germane to the experiencing this film.
I just want.
What's that?
I just want people to see it one way or another. That's the goal.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to bring up too much personal stuff. When I was married to an African American, and as evolved as I was, and she looked on my bookshelf when we were dating, and she goes, "Oh my God, you're so evolved." But it's because I did take some classes in African Americans. I didn't focus on it, but I did take some, and I had a lot of great books. But I went to a very, very progressive summer camp that was very integrated, and then I went to an extremely integrated high school in Queens, which I didn't even really blink an eye to. I didn't realize how unique an experience. But with all of that, Rachel, I still didn't have a clue, maybe a little clue, but I didn't really know much until I was actually married and seeing things through her eyes. And it took a lot, and it really required a lot of me to not be defensive and not be reactive, or I had to kind of just be humble about it and start over.
That must have been really hard, and hard on like an intimate relationship too.
It certainly was. I mean, and then there's families, I mean, you just figure, well, I'm a liberal, I love everybody, I'm colorblind and all these things, but it's a good start. That's all it is.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of the issue, I don't know how old you are, but we might be around.
I'm 20.
You're 20? Really?
Almost 3 times though.
But growing up, I'm slightly younger than you are, but not by much. And growing up, these things just weren't talked about like this.
No.
I mean, like in the 70s, everybody, free to be you and me. Like,
yeah,
we were one people, and this notion that somehow equal rights had been achieved, glossed over.
Yeah.
So many things. I remember I moved around a lot growing up, and I remember in most of the places we lived, the neighborhoods were all white, or predominantly white. And I remember thinking to myself, why is that? Like, why is it that like these neighborhoods are, why is it that my school is mostly white when I live right outside of Chicago?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is that? And I really do.
Well, it would have taken a lot, it sounds like, to do all that work on your own. And when it should have ideally been, I say ideally, but been taught to you why it is the case.
Well, that's it. Like, one of the books that was on my shelf that I read while I was making this was Frederick Douglass. No one ever told me to read Frederick Douglass in school. Can you believe that? That's extraordinary. How is it possible that I went to 2 Ivy League universities and never read Frederick Douglass? That's just a tragedy. I mean, that makes no sense. And that's because in a very profound way, the story of the United States has always been the story of white men in power.
Right. Well, your daughters, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
No, it's okay.
I was just going to say, your daughters now can benefit from.
Well, we talk about whiteness all the time in my house. like my poor kids. Like,
yeah, but when they're older, they're going to be grateful.
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe they'll hate me. It's possible.
I didn't say that. Of course, they'll, but they'll be grateful they'll be, be able to sort of really have a deeper understanding and empathy.
The hardest part about this film and about the subject is that it makes people so uncomfortable, and that people really do feel incredibly uncomfortable talking about the reality of what they feel and what they see and what they experience on all sides, right? Like,
yeah, right.
Everyone is massively uncomfortable.
Right, but more white people. Just kidding.
I don't think that's
I'm kidding
true.
around. I was joking.
I don't think it's true. I think Black people feel really uncomfortable too. Like, how about like being the one Black kid in a private school in a history classroom and talking about slavery and having the entire class turn and stare at you as though you have like some answer.
Right, you're going to represent the entire race.
Yeah. There are all sorts of experiences that people of color have that are, that they don't necessarily announce in the moment, like, hey guys, this is really uncomfortable for me. So I just think we need to be, I've been surprised at how uncomfortable the movie makes people, because it doesn't make me uncomfortable, but it makes a lot of people really uncomfortable.
I don't know. I try to turn it into like lemonade by just sort of saying, just embrace our, everything that's happening, in terms of the race dialogue, because it's just so liberating. It's just like people that are so afraid of being in a white minority in this country. It's like, this is where I wasn't going to go in our official conversation, but bringing it to today's, situation here. But it's just like, who cares? Just don't give it up. It's like life's so much easier when you're not walking around with all this fear and hate and all that. It's just
complicated because, like I was saying before, real equality does require sacrifice.
That's right. Yes, right.
Like white people who have something do actually kind of have to give something up. They do, and it like that. And if we want to, the thing is that we don't really see ourselves as citizens of the same country. I mean, since I'm not an American historian, so I can't speak on this authoritatively, but certainly over the course of my lifetime, starting like with Reagan, the sense of like every man for himself, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. The government isn't going to help you.
Individualism. Yeah.
I mean, we are all on our own. Even people with means, you're on your own. And there's not a real sense in this country right now of we are in this together. And that question of how are we going to cultivate that? How are we going to be in this together so that we actually care about the people around us who don't have the things that we have, so that we aren't just simply trying to hold on and protect, but that we can actually, because when you have, like, I live in this amazing neighborhood where my neighbors are, I have the best neighbors in the world. And they're so supportive of, my child was in the hospital and our neighbors they helped us with our other kid. Like we were there for they were there for me, when I needed help, and I needed help. And in the same way, like that feels really good to have the support of your neighbors. And I do think there's a way, if we felt more connected to each other as citizens, that we could cultivate more of that spirit, not just on our blocks, but in a larger space. Other people would disagree with me though. Some people, like Greg Carr in the movie, thinks it's impossible.
Well, that's yeah. Well, you're going to have a variety of opinions and experiences.
I'm sorry about your relationship with your wife. It sounds really stressful.
Oh, with my ex-wife? No, where we found an even, we found a happy place.
I'm glad, but it still sounds really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I know interracial couples who, especially this moment right now, I think for a lot of interracial couples, it's been very difficult.
We split up during the Obama years, now that I think about it.
Well, maybe that's a blessing, so you didn't have to go through this moment together. But it's
well, we're still raising a child, through this period. So
I wish you well. I mean, I think the best we can all do is just be open and honest, right? And say the things we think and feel out loud, and just be honest about it. And try not to berate each other.
Mm-hmm. Maybe this was a part 2. I don't know that or just a longer conversation. I do.
Anyway, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch the film. I appreciate you helping me with it.
I'm sure, and I'll look forward to meeting you in person one of these days. And
that'd be lovely.
Good luck. Okay, take care.